At this stage is to welcome people and thank you very much for coming. I've been looking forward to this night for some time now, and justifiably I'd say because of the amount of people that's here, and so I know that tonight is a bad night because it's a long weekend. I know that there's a concert at the Christian school that took some people from being here tonight, so maybe that's a good thing because we haven't got many more seats left anyhow, but there are some up the front up here, and there's an odd one about, so there's no need to stand up if you want a seat. There's plenty of seats up here, or there's some seats up here if you need them anyhow, so please come and use that. But so tonight I know we've got a number of politicians here, and I want to thank you all for coming. I'm not going to mention you all because I know if I do I will miss some people out, and I don't want to do that, so thank you very much for coming, and it shows to me that both the state and the federal government is quite concerned about what we're going to talk about tonight. So tonight is going to be facilitated by our local federal member, Whiteley, so welcome, Brett, and I'll hand over to you to let us know what the format of the night's going to be. But thank you very much for coming, everybody. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Darryl, and welcome everybody. It's just tremendous to see this place packed, because I know there is a genuine interest when our communities do come under any sort of threat, at whatever level you may determine it to be. So I think tonight will give us all an opportunity to gain information, and I think the predominant reason for this forum tonight is to provide information. A lot of people have contacted me on Facebook and through the office to say they really don't understand what the issue is. Some are saying they don't understand what difference there is to this drug to any other drug that we've heard of in the last 20 years. Some have been quite anxious about recent media attention. Some have thought that attention was long overdue. Others have been very disappointed at what it might have portrayed the region to be like to the rest of the country, and I understand that, and I'm concerned about that. So whatever the reason you are here tonight, we would just hope that you would go away with more of an information about this issue. We will give opportunity at the end of the presentations to ask questions. It's a good time for me to stress that those questions ideally should be directed as questions about the issue as it relates to our guests tonight. There will be no room, as far as I'm concerned, as the facilitator mediator tonight, and I will quickly shut it down if it gets to that point. There is no room at all for any defamatory comments, no room at all for any specific allegations of criminality or such. We have two very decent officers with us tonight, and I'd suggest, and I'll remind you again at the end of the night, if you have anything of specific concern that you'd like to share, I trust our guest tonight implicitly, and I'd ask you to, as I said to him in the room before, you can pin his ears around the corner for a couple of minutes and you can pass that information on. But I think just by the nods I saw in the room, it's not a night for people to be making emotional outbursts of allegations without any substance, because that is a matter of grave concern in a legal sense. So I hope you understand the perimeters of where we might be going tonight. So as I said, there will be room to ask questions, to make observations based on what you've heard, and I would hope, and everybody that's going to be involved tonight, our hope is that we'll all go away as a community, as a region, with a far better understanding of the challenge that is to be faced, to get an understanding maybe of where it sits in the balanced challenges that we face as a region against probably the rest of the country. I think it's fair to say, and I'll finish with this, that as one of 150 federal members of Parliament, this issue has been top of the pops for most of my colleagues from every party now for the 12 or 13 months that I've been the elected representative. It's been spoken about at length. It is an issue across the nation, and it breaks your heart to hear some of the stories that abound in communities around the country. So I just want to say that it is an issue across the country. Cities, metropolitan, larger regional cities, small country towns and villages, there are challenges. And those challenges aren't just on the drug ice, those challenges are at a most base level amongst younger and older people. And when we talk about substance abuse, we should be grown up enough to accept the fact that that substance abuse is not just illicit drugs, but in fact it is other forms of addiction that many people face, whether that be alcohol, prescription drugs, going through to the nth degree. There are issues as a community we need to face. So thank you for that opportunity to give you that little briefing. I hope you understand the boundaries under which I'd seek to run tonight's program, and I think if that's the case we can all go away tonight, hopefully as a community, as they say, singing from the same hymn sheet. There will be opportunities into the future to discuss more specific issues that may come from tonight. But tonight, with 350 people, is not the night to be looking for ultimate solutions to what is obviously a huge challenge. So tonight we have guests ranging from the former lovable, I can say now because he'd think I was looking for a favour if I called him that once before, retired magistrate in Don Jones. Would you please welcome Don to Smithton tonight? He tells me he's too busy, he hasn't had any chance for golf yet, so I'm saying you're failing in your retirement goals, Don. It's great to have the Minister for Health here to make the trip today, and it's great to see Michael Ferguson in the crowd tonight. So would you please welcome the Minister? We have the Western District Commander in Locky, Avery, and it's always good to see Locky, so would you please welcome Locky? Circular Head Mayor needs introduction. Can I just take the opportunity to thank the Mayor and all councillors in the Circular Head Council for their hospitality tonight. Whether you've just been re-elected or newly elected, congratulations. Like every other municipal area, there are challenges for all of you to face, and you all need to work together to overcome them. So great to see you there, Darryl, tonight. We also have the gentleman with the longest title tonight. He wins the prize. He's the Clinical Director of Medicine for Alcohol and Drug Services in Tasmania. Would you please welcome Dr. Adrian Reynolds? You should get an acronym for that, mate. It's a bit too long. Now I'd like to hand over for the first part of the evening, which will take up probably about 20 minutes. It may go a fraction more than that, but I've told Rob I'm going to rattle the glass if it goes much longer. And would you please welcome to give the first presentation of the evening, the Rural Health Tasmania CEO, Rob Waterman.
Thank you, Brett. I might just put this up a little bit taller than you. Okay. Just before I start the presentation, I just wanted to. I've had a lot of questions, and specifically over the last 12 weeks. I took over from Di, the previous manager of Rural Health, in January this year, and I had probably only been there a couple of weeks, and some community members come to me and they said to me they had some concerns about what was happening in the community, and that was the very first conversation, and it was around ice, and I spoke to them about it. It had been raised, I believe, previously by the council, and I guess the conversation started to grow from there, and more and more people started coming in and seeing me about it. So I looked into a few different things, what was happening, and I was already aware that there was a lack of services, I guess drug and alcohol services, specifically in Circular Head, and there was a lack of residential treatment available in northwest Tasmania. The topic just grew from there. So there was also a comment, or there have been a few comments around the media and Circular Head being singled out, and I wanted to make it clear, and I have made it clear to the media right the way through this is happening right across Australia. And I think the reason why we hear the word Circular Head so much is because we have been proactive as a community. And you're from Circular Head, this is about, we're obviously going to be concerned, people from Circular Head are going to be concerned about people from Circular Head. So but Circular Head is by no means singled out. This is happening in a lot of communities all over Australia, and there's been a lot of media about those other communities as well on the mainland. There was also some conversation around statistics, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. One thing about the stats is people with substance abuse issues, they're very hard to get the stats from because they don't generally present very easily for treatment. So drug and alcohol stats historically are quite hard to collect. And it's very hard to collect because there was no, dedicated drug and alcohol service in Smithton. It's very hard to produce statistics when there's no service here collecting those stats. So there's a need around some of that, collecting a bit more data around that. And the way I view statistics, I guess there's a lot of statistics around, but I tend to not get too caught up on statistics themselves, but I tend to look for patterns. So if you see an overall general increase or decrease with lots of different types of stats, because people collect different statistics around what's going on for different reasons. The police will collect them for their set of circumstances, and health will collect them for their set of circumstances, and we look for different things in different statistics. So it can be, and I understand it can be a bit confusing for people that aren't familiar with why we do that, why we collect statistics, and Adrian might even be able to reflect on that a little bit, but I do accept that it can be a bit confusing. So just on the, and I do accept there's a lot of talk about the drug ice at the moment, and I do accept and I do acknowledge that substance abuse overall, alcohol, tobacco and other drug use in the community is a concern right across Australia, but it was the drug ice that was brought to me as a concern, and I have felt it necessary to talk about ice and not specifically about other drugs, because that was the issue that was brought to me in the early stages, and that was the issue that parents were saying to me that they were concerned about, and that was the drug that people were continuously coming into my office and wanting to talk to me about. So I don't want to devalue that by diverting it to other drugs, although I do accept that there is an issue right across the board with substance abuse and other drugs in the community. I have tried to keep it about methamphetamine ice to the best of my ability. So, having said that, I'll get on with the presentation. So basically tonight I wanted to talk about what ice is, how serious is it, how did it get to this point, and what we can do about it. So I've tried to keep it fairly straightforward, so I don't overwhelm you with too much information. Now this is the type of information you'd see on any brochure about methamphetamine ice. It's a stimulant drug. That may not mean a lot to people, but it speeds up the messages travelling between the brain and the body. And most of you can read what's on there. It's stronger, more addictive than other types of methamphetamine or amphetamine, and more harmful side effects. But what I probably would say about ice from a non-brochure type presentation is the harms that it causes to individuals and their families. It doesn't just harm the individual that's using it, it causes significant harm to the family members of people, or the family members of those who are using it. And it's one of the most addictive drugs that I've come across. And I'll talk about a little bit about that. There'll be a slide in a little while, and I'll talk about how addictive it is and why it's so addictive. And a lot of this information I've tried to keep from a non-clinically, but about the information that people that have used this drug that have relayed to me over the years. And I should have probably said at the start, I spent a lot of years working on the mainland in drug and alcohol rehabilitation services over there, and I spent three years over here working with the Salvation Army Bridge program. I spent another 3 years working with the court-mandated drug diversion program before I came across to rural health. So I've been in the alcohol and other drug and mental health sector for quite a long time, and I've been I couldn't tell you how many thousands of conversations I've had with people that use methamphetamine ice. and I've seen a lot of the harms associated with this drug. I've seen some devastating consequences of people who have had to be so heavily medicated because of the psychosis that's occurred because of this drug. And it's so unpredictable in how it impacts on people. Some people seem to, they come out of it a little bit better than others. Some people are they have a very low tolerance to the effects of this drug, and they seem to have a lot of mental health problems at a very, very early stage. It doesn't take long to use this drug before they start experiencing a lot of mental health problems. And other people are a little bit more resilient, but I've also seen a lot of mental health issues when they've come off the drug too. So they've, like within perhaps a week after coming off the drug, then they've started to experience psychosis and other mental health problems. So it's very, I guess, unpredictable from that point of view, but the one thing I can tell you is there's no safe use of this drug, okay? And the effects of this are very, very serious and they're very severe, like I said, on both the individual, families and the community. Now, I'll just get into some statistics a little bit, and I'll talk to you a little bit about this, what I was just trying to explain before. There's a lot of different stats around, and different organisations or services collect different stats, and they seem to come up with different information. So this was from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, 2005. So this is going back 9 years, and they were saying back then almost 1 in 10 Australians have ever tried it. So they're talking about in their lifetime that they have tried methamphetamine. Around 500,000 Australians were current users, so we're going back to 2005 again, and that was from the National Drug and Alcohol Research Centre. Now, the Swinburne University and the Australian Drug Foundation also put out some research stating that up to 1 in 10, or 12%, 20 to 29-year-olds have reported using it within the past 12 months. So you've got to remember, depending on what group they're sampling, is going to depend on what sort of statistics they get. Okay, but it wasn't the actual statistics that I was looking for when I was looking for all this research. It was actually patterns of behaviour and trends right across the board. So, and I'll explain that a little bit more. 2010 to 2013. So one of the largest studies that gets done is the National Drug Strategy Household Survey, it's called. There was one done in 2010 and there was another one done in 2013. Now the 2010 results from that are fairly readily available, but the 2013 results, there's only a little bit of information that's come to light from that so far. But the one thing that has come to light is that people that were previously using different forms of amphetamine have dropped from 51% to 29%, and the use of ice amongst amphetamine users has gone from 22% up to 50% now using ice. So they've actually switched the type of drug that they're using because ice has become more prevalent and more available. And this was from the Australian Institute of Criminology. And this was from 32,776 voluntary urinalysis tests of people that were in custody. 2009, 13% of them tested positive to methamphetamine. You can see the results there. 2010 was 16%, 2011. So we've seen an increase there. And this was also prevalence of alcohol and other drug driving. So this was drug driving and drink driving, the people that were detained for drug driving or drink driving. And that's also from the Australian Institute of Criminology, and that's showing that there's more people now being detained testing positive to drugs, so for drug driving, than there are drink driving. So according to the Australian Institute of Criminology, drug driving has now surpassed drink driving. There are some things that can affect these statistics as well, I guess, but as to the people that are being detained and those types of things, and Commander Avery might be able to shine some light on that for you. And then I looked at different states. I looked to see what was happening around the country, not just in Tasmania or in Circular Head. I was looking to see if it was happening anywhere else and what sort of things were happening in other states and other regions. And I don't know, some of you might have seen, there's been a lot on the news about Shepparton, Echuca, Geelong, Tasmania, a lot of different areas around Victoria. Shepparton reported a 110% increase in drug-related crime, and Wodonga was, Latrobe was up 56% rise in drug-related crime, and Wodonga reported 37%. So obviously they're seeing different impacts in different communities, but again, they're all showing an increase in drug-related crime. Possession and using drug offences were up 64% in Victoria in 2009, from 2009-10 to 2012-13. And from 2004 to 2006, Victoria did the random drug testing for drivers in Victoria during that period, and they tested over 25,000 drivers. Back in 2004-2006, there was 1 in 50 tested positive, and in 2013, 1 in 11 tested positive. And that was during a short specific campaign where they were doing random drug tests. But again, significant increase in the amount of people that were testing positive. Obviously, there's a lot of serious crime associated with methamphetamine ice, and you can see here from Victoria, there was reported that 14 deaths in 14 months in Victoria. Queensland. So I went into Queensland and had a look at the drug driving testing up in Queensland. 2008, there was 1 in 50 drivers tested positive for illicit drugs. 2012, 1 in 20 drivers tested positive for illicit drugs. So there's a significant increase over those 4 years. I should just go back to Victoria too. The drug driving stats from Victoria was only around amphetamine type stimulants and cannabis. They left out a lot of the other drugs. They were only looking specifically for illicit drugs, so there was no confusion around prescription medications and that type of thing. That was specifically around illicit drugs. And I'm sure Commander Avery can explain some of this. 2011 to 2012, there was 1,678 drivers tested, and 349 of them tested positive, which is around 1 in 5. In 2012-13, it was 1 in 4, and then 2013-14, it was 1 in 3, and nearly half of that 1 in 3 tested positive for amphetamine. So it was almost 1 in 6. Now, I found this statistic really difficult to accept, even myself with all the experience that I have in the alcohol and other drug sector. I found this statistic to just be mind-boggling, and Commander Avery will shine some light. I'm sure he doesn't mind telling me, like in Tasmania, and the explanation I got was in Tasmania, it's called random drug testing, but they will specifically pull over people who are known to them and those types of things. So, or if they're in an area where there's known to be drugs, that type of thing, and that does affect the stats. It does change the picture a bit. But overall, again, I'm looking at statistics, and there's an increase right across the board from year to year, and that's what I'm looking at. I'm not looking at the number of people or even the percentage of people. I'm looking for whether there's an increase or decrease to see what's happening in other communities. Also, there was from 96-97 to 2011-12, there was a 780% increase in methamphetamine-related crime, and I'm not sure that Don Jones could probably shine some light on that as well, what he's seen over the years, especially over the last couple of years. And I should have probably said, it's been, in my experience, it's been, what I've seen in Tasmania and what I've seen on the mainland, it's been very specific. The last couple of years is where I've seen the spike in the use of methamphetamine ice. I saw this a long time ago. I saw this around 2000, from about 2000 onwards on the mainland. And when I came to Tasmania, it was a relief. There was no methamphetamine ice here, okay? And we didn't have heroin problem here either, like they did in Sydney. So it was really, really refreshing to come to a state that didn't have these issues going on. So you can imagine my disappointment and my passion about this. That's why I want to do something about this, because I really, really enjoyed working in the drug and alcohol sector and not have to deal with the issue of ice and not have to deal with the issue of heroin. So, I mean, there are other issues around opiates and that type of thing in Tasmania, but it wasn't as severe as what it was on the mainland. But I did witness that same pattern starting to occur in Tasmania, and that's what got my attention and made me want to do something about it. Actually, I should go back to that slide. So, if you just have a look at that slide, that sort of really correlates with what I've been saying over the last couple of years. Now, this is around water detections. The last 12 months, or 2011, 2012 to 2012, 2013, so it's not including this year, you'll see the red line is the number of detections at Australian borders, and the blue line, the blue graph line, is the weight. And you'll see from the early instance there was around 500 kilos and it's gone up to over 2,000 kilos. So there's been a bit over 4 times the amount of drugs detected at the Australian borders in that 12-month period. And you'll see there's a spike where it doubled over that 12-month period, and that was the number of detections. So they're also not going down, they were going up. Okay, so why is ice so addictive? There's lots of different stories and there's lots of different reasons and explanations you can give around why is ice so addictive, but I'm going to give you an explanation from people that have been using the drug. Okay, and I've probably aptly named it the unshakable memory. Everyone I've spoken to that has got off methamphetamine ice, even years down the track, so you remember, worked on the mainland, it was around for a long time over there. The people that have been clean and free from drug use for 4 or 5 years said they were still, and I use the word, and I'm not trying to dramatise things, but they said they were still haunted by the memory of the first time they used it. They couldn't shake that memory of how they felt the first time they used this drug. And that is a really serious concern to me. It's specifically, and I guess from a marketing point of view for people that sell drugs, that's what keeps people coming back to it. They just can't shake that memory of how good it felt the first time, and they said they spent many, many years trying to chase that same effect without success, and they would use any number of excuses, saying that it wasn't as good a quality this time, or I didn't get it from the right place, or they'd look for all different types of reasons as to why they weren't getting the same effect, and they never will. That first time use, they will never get the same effect again after that. It might get close if they use more and more of the products, but people that have got clean and have all said the same thing, that they haven't been able to get rid of that memory, and that's what has made it so difficult for them to get off of ice. It was a really difficult process for them. Obviously it's more potent and it's stronger, which makes it more addictive, and the availability has increased, and I've had many conversations with Dr. Reynolds around this. Availability has a very significant impact on whether people use drugs or not. Obviously, if it's harder to get, it's probably less likely to be used. But the one thing that we don't generally talk about, and this is where I wanted to move into the solution side of this, is, and I'll try to keep this as simple as I can, but it's regarding what they call risk factors and protective factors. And these are the things, protective factors are the things that keep us safe, and risk factors are obviously things around us that cause ones. So they're things outside of us that cause us risk or that protect us. And then there's, I guess, personal protective factors and personal risk factors, and they're to do with how we think and how we behave, and whether it's risky behaviour or whether it's protective behaviour. So some people might use drugs in a certain situation where others won't, and people with more protective factors are less likely to use drugs than people with less protective factors and more risk factors. So that's probably as simple as I can put it, but I'll try and explain it a bit better as I go through this. Okay, this is what I was referring to before, the unshakable memory, and I do apologise for the PowerPoint presentation, but this was as good as I could get it with this projector. And some of it's a little bit out of sync, but you'll see if you imagine the little white square on the left-hand side of the screen there, that would be your normal dopamine levels in a person that's not using drugs, just running around, getting around their daily business. Somebody that uses methamphetamine ice, that would be the yellow would be a representation of their dopamine levels when they use ice. After prolonged use, though, something quite significant happens, is the dopamine levels don't return to normal when they stop using ice. In fact, the brain's capacity to keep making dopamine eventually becomes exhausted, and they find it difficult to maintain those levels of dopamine. Now, things like dopamine and serotonin are very important to how we function mentally, and the only way that they feel that they can get those dopamine levels back up is to reuse. So that's one of the other reasons. So there's lots of different explanations as to why drugs are addictive, but ice is specifically addictive, and why I say it's a very dangerous drug is because it produces massive levels of dopamine, and it's very harmful long term to the brain. Okay, so what have we got so far in the community how have we tried to deal with this issue of drugs in the community? So we've got law enforcement. Now, I'm sure most police will tell you that we're not going to arrest our way out of this. There's no way that the police can keep up with all drugs right across the whole of society. It's just not possible. They do a great job at what they do, and they do a good job at getting a lot of these harmful drugs off our streets. But as far as all the drugs that are around and the police being able to impact on that to a point where they can eradicate all drugs, I just don't think we're ever going to see that. There's also drug and alcohol treatment. Now, excuse me, so drug and alcohol treatment on its own is not going to resolve this problem. Okay, and I believe that's for a couple of reasons. I don't think we have, as far as drug and alcohol treatment services go, I don't think we have the whole package. I don't think we have everything we need. But as from a treatment point of view, so treatment is about treatment. It's exactly that. It's for people who are using drugs, for people that need treatment for their drug abuse. And they may have been using drugs for 20 or 30 years, so they've been doing it for a long time. They're the sort of people that will go into treatment. Some people do it quite early, depending on those protective factors I was talking to you about before. So some people that have more protective factors, they might seek treatment earlier. And I saw a definite shift in Tasmania when I came to Tasmania, even before ICE was around. People were seeking treatment earlier in Tasmania than what they were on the mainland, and that's a good thing. Like, that shows, I don't know what that's about, but it was a definite shift for what I was used to. Most people that I was seeing on the mainland were in their 40s, 30s, 40s seeking treatment, and I was seeing 17, 19-year-olds in Tasmania seeking treatment. So I thought that was a really proactive, and it showed that there was a definite shift in the youth here to the youth on the mainland. The other issue is education. There's a bit of drug and alcohol education that goes on around schools and that type of thing, and we try to provide a little bit of that at rural health, but I don't believe there's enough of it. There's nowhere near enough of drug and alcohol education going on for our kids. They need to be better educated about drugs. But again, education on its own, we're not going to educate our way out of this problem. And you can probably see where I'm going with this. Okay, so then we've got early intervention prevention services. That's where I see a really big hole in service delivery in Tasmania and nationally. I think, and this is a conversation, early intervention, promotion and prevention the conversation's been going on for a long time. It was in the national and the state drug strategy. It was in the Roads to Recovery report that was put out by Tony Abbott when he was Minister for Health. The conversation's been going a long time, but for some reason we get to the conversation and it stops there, and we don't see those services hitting the ground. We don't see them implemented in our community. And I believe the reason for this was our lack of understanding of what that actually meant. We knew that we needed to do something from a prevention point of view, but we didn't understand exactly what that was. And drug and alcohol services have evolved over the years. Like we've learned to keep up to the best of our ability with current best practice, but and we've dealt with, I guess, substance abuse to the best of our ability, but there's definitely been a lack of getting early intervention prevention programs on the ground right across the nation from a drug and alcohol perspective. And then you've got the residential treatment services. So we've got obviously residential treatment in Avondale and in Hobart, but there's nothing on the northwest coast, and there's certainly nothing in Smith or Circular Head. So I believe there's a big gap there. I believe we need residential treatment on the northwest coast as well. We've got it in the south around Hobart, we've got it near Launceston, but people in the northwest coast are disadvantaged from that aspect. There's no residential treatment for them. Now, one of the other issues around we talk about people need to change the way they think about drugs, and people that use drugs, if they could change the way they think, maybe they wouldn't so readily or easily use drugs. But I think drug and alcohol services as a whole, we need to change the way we think a little bit about drug and alcohol users or substance users. We generally, if I was to ask most people in the community, they would see drug users as a group of people. When actually you've probably got three groups of people. I've only included two here. So you've got drug users, the people that are currently using drugs, but you've also got another group in there, and that's people who are going to use drugs. Now if you have a look at the slide up here, so the people that are using drugs now, they used to be in that group on the left. They used to be people that hadn't used drugs yet, but they were going to use drugs, because obviously if they're using drugs now, they were part of that group. And there's also the non-drug users, the people that are never going to use drugs. So, but they're not the ones that I'm concerned about. I'm more concerned about the people that are at risk of using drugs. And I think historically we've focused very heavily on treatment on those people that are using drugs. I really think we need to change the way we think about this and shift our thinking across to helping the people that are going to use drugs. We need to get rid of that group basically, so they don't want to use drugs, they're looking to other things with their lives, and they are then not going to make it across into that group of people that are using drugs, so they're not going to require treatment. And over a period of generations, hopefully we'll see less and less people seeking treatment because there's less and less drug users, because we're doing better at preventing drug use rather than treating it once it's occurred, because I think it's cheaper, it's much easier to work with someone around prevention than it is to try and help someone once they've started using drugs and they've spent 20 or 30 years using, especially methamphetamines and ice and other drugs. Okay. Now, I want to talk a little bit about, law enforcement predominantly, they try to eliminate supply as best as they can. But for there to be a supply, there needs to be a demand. Now, it's the community that provides that demand. It's the community that are the drug users, okay? If you stop people from wanting to use drugs, if you can not have people wanting to use drugs, it's like any product. If there's no demand, there's not going to be a supply. Now, whether we can get that to a point where it's completely successful, I don't know, but I'm very, very confident that we can actually make a big impact in that way, that we can reduce the number of people that are wanting to use drugs. So does that make sense to people? If there's no demand for drugs, there's not going to be a supply. If nobody wanted to drive a car manufacturers wouldn't be around. And if nobody wanted to buy any particular product, those products wouldn't be around. So eliminating demand is the key. And I want to talk a little bit about that just very quickly, and we're nearly at the end of this, about what prevention actually looks like. So, and it may not be what a lot of people are thinking. So some of the common risk factors that I was talking about before, if you remember I spoke about risk factors and protective factors. One of the most common ones is desensitisation. So a lot of the behaviours that we do in front of children become very easily desensitised to that behaviour, and they normalise it and they find it acceptable. And if that behaviour is demonstrated by a parent or a carer, somebody that they have a very strong bond with, they accept that a lot more readily as a natural process. So they think, well, it's okay, mum and dad are doing it, so it's okay if I do it, basically. Then we've got early attachment, trauma, abuse and neglect. Now, over the years I've continuously looked at this, and I've thought, I've always looked for the similarities, I guess, and the differences in people that use drugs and people that don't use drugs. And I've known a lot of people, as difficult as it is, that have experienced trauma and neglect and abuse that don't use drugs. I've known plenty that do use drugs too, but not all people that have experienced trauma and neglect use drugs. But there has been some specific things that I did notice over the years, and a lot of the research, I can't see the National Drug Research Institute has also done a lot of work on this. There are specific, those risk factors we talk about. Things like self-esteem, low self-esteem is a risk factor. not taking responsibility. So these are all things that we normally teach our kids from a young age, and there's a lot of behaviours and values that we try and instill in our kids from a young age. Now, it's not to say that kids don't have all these values or that they don't have some level of them. We don't have to miss much. Most people still have some level of a lot of these different values and behaviours. Like, they're honest to a degree unless it becomes really difficult, then they might lie. Or they take responsibility most of the time unless it's really serious, and then they don't. So there's varying levels of these types of behaviours and values in our kids, but this is where the solution is, that I believe the solution is in trying to get really robust, strong values and behaviours in our kids at a young age. So they grow up taking responsibility, they grow up being honest, they grow up with acceptance. So when things don't quite go well for them, they accept that and say, all right, well, that didn't work out, I'll try something else. They have good emotional regulation, they have good communication skills. They're independent, they're resilient, so they don't give up at the first sign of failure. They keep trying, and if that doesn't work, they'll try something else, but they keep trying. So a lot of these behaviours I wouldn't say they're absent in people with addiction, but they're definitely compromised in a lot of ways. Now, the one most interesting thing around this, I spoke about trauma and neglect earlier. These behaviours, I have never, in all the thousands of people that I've worked with, I have never worked with a person that has a really good, healthy level of all these behaviours and values. They've never come in for treatment. I don't see them. I've never seen them, because they don't have substance use problems. Okay, they have the resilience and I guess enough of that, what we would call pro-social education and role modelling, to know that there are alternatives, and they know that it's going to destroy their life, and they know that's not what they want. They know they want to go somewhere else. They know they want to do something else. So they do something else, basically, and they don't use drugs. And I really believe that this is where the answer is in educating, better educating. It's not to say that kids aren't educated or parents don't do the best that they can, but if we can understand this a little bit better and provide more of this, we can do more to protect our children. These are what you would call protective factors. That type of education provides protective factors for our children. The other end of that, or the opposite, the lack of that, we would call risk factors. Yep. Okay, so Brett's given me the wrap up. So there's a slide here. Now, there's a printout of this out the front, and this is to do with basically physical and behavioural indicators of people that are using ice. So if you're concerned about someone, a friend, a loved one that may be using the drug, there's some information out the front around to the right there, and it's got a lot of those things. So things like changing peers and role models, that type of thing. Change of behaviour, becoming unreliable, asking for money without being able to show things for it. There's a big long list of them there, but you get the idea. Now, any one of these doesn't mean that a person's using drugs, but when you start to combine a lot of these together, you might be starting to get concerned, be starting to ask questions, and the best way to do that is to really promote good, healthy, open, honest conversation with your kids and with people that you care about, so you can have these discussions, because a lot of the issues around drug use is people don't want to talk about it, and especially to their parents, they'll deny it, say no, everything's fine, nothing's going on, that type of thing. So if you have good open lines of communication with your kids, it is a lot easier. And I think we're there.
Gathered members of Parliament from national and state parliaments, and government and opposition. Saw Mr Green here, and O'Connor from my House of Parliament, Joan Ryder and Roger Yench. It's a delight to be here. I was in the room this afternoon. I saw all of the empty chairs, and I said to Rob and to Norm, where did you get all the chairs from? Well, they've been gathering them from all around town. And what's so encouraging about being here in your community this evening and seeing the chairs all being used and people standing at the rear of the hall, it tells me that there is a great sense of not just interest in the circular head northwest about owning this problem, but secondly wanting to come to a sense of unity about what to do about it. And I find that very encouraging. I'm sure if I may please take the indulgence of suggesting that on behalf of the politicians here tonight, I might suggest that we all leave the politics in our parliaments. Tonight is your night to share with me and with my colleagues how you feel about what Robert has shared, how you feel about what you've seen in your community.
and how you feel about the young people, people of all ages, that you may know who have been affected by the scourge of drugs. We know it's a wicked problem. This morning at 9 o'clock I was in Evandale, just to the south of Launceston, and so forgive me for not mentioning anything about this young person that might identify him, but he came from northwest Tasmania. His life was a train smash. He gained the benefit of having been through the most extraordinary crisis in his life that resulted in physically being removed from the family home by police, being involved in a car crash that killed a friend, facing criminal charges and the collapse of his life. But today, he's a 24-year-old miracle. He's a success. He's made it through because he got the love and support of Serenity House, the continuing love and support of his family, and Missiondale at Evandale. And I think that's the brighter future that is my vision, and I think I could say perhaps it's our vision tonight and where we need to get to. So I won't make long announcements tonight about how I see the extent of the problem and what solutions I might imagine. I'm honoured to be here tonight because I've got 2 ears and I intend to use them tonight. And I'm surrounded by eminent people, experts. Mr Jones, Tasmania's probably most eminent drug and alcohol physician, Dr Reynolds, from Alcohol and Drug Services, and from our law enforcement. We can all learn tonight. I would invite you to join me on the journey that I'm on. And to let you know that from the government's point of view, we take this very seriously. And what is most exciting from tonight for me is what I can witness. An interest in the community joining with law enforcement, joining with families, joining with service providers, to join with government, to recognise that not one of us have the full set of answers on what to do, but together we in fact do have the full set of answers by working together. I want to place on the record that the research that we commissioned, in fact I commissioned this work the day after I met Mr Waterman, whose meeting with me in Hobart moved me greatly. The day after that meeting I commissioned Dr Reynolds to do research, to come back with a clinical base of evidence as to the extent of the problem, not just of ice as a singular drug, but of the drug problem. Not just in the northwest community, because I won't tolerate the idea of this community being singled out as the drug capital of any state or any part of this country. So to gather a vision for what the level of the problem is across our wonderful state. That work is nearly complete, and we released an interim of that just yesterday. I'm sorry I didn't bring enough copies for you all, but there are some at the back, in fact at the front of the room, to collect at the end of the evening. So it looks like this, has a lot of glue on the front, and if you're interested, please grab a copy of that. What it says in summary is that it is a growing problem, has been for 10 years, and ice is a part of that problem. Our biggest problem with drugs in Tasmania is in fact with alcohol. The next is prescription drugs and polydrugs, so mixture of drug use and abuse, and followed by cannabis, and followed well behind with ice. That is not to criticise or denigrate the organisers of tonight who say that ice is a growing problem, because in fact I agree that it is a growing problem. Ice is a growing problem. But I wanted to put it also into some perspective. The lives of so many Tasmanians are so greatly affected. And in summary, the numbers are of those people presenting to state-funded alcohol and drug treatment services is 40% alcohol, 35% cannabis-related, and having been 10 is now 12.4%. Amphetamines, which does show an increase. So are we concerned? Yes, we are. Let's work towards solutions. I look forward to the rest of the presentations tonight. Thank you for listening to me now, and I will come back if invited and if it's appropriate and share about a vision for some of the possibilities for how our government can work with your community to present a better and more hopeful future and options for better service to your community. Thank you very much.
I'm in favour of community awareness of the problem and this forum should accomplish this community awareness. What I am concerned is exaggeration and sensationalising the problem to the stage where a community tends to turn on each other, feeds on gossip, innuendo, and tends to incorrectly interpret data, trying to find blame for the government departments, and all certain groups in the community. Dismissing sensationalism may achieve dramatic community awareness, but will build a perception that the community is not safe. There's a perception there are drug-crazed people out there. We should lock up everything and not go out and enjoy the area. Community safety is of great importance to me as a police officer, and not only should it be a reality, but the people should feel safe in the community. A feeling of not being safe, even though this is not a reality, will have a significant effect on the good reputation of the council and the community that has been built up over the many years. So let's try to put it in some perspective. The use of illicit drugs may not be significantly increasing. It probably is, however, the drug of choice always seems to change. Throughout my career, I've seen alcohol, firstly, cannabis, opiates in the form of poppy diversions, then speed, ecstasy, and now ice. And we go through stages of being, and ice seems to be now the stage of being the drug of choice. The current problem has probably manifested and become more obvious in that the physical and behavioural effects of ice are much more instant and apparent to the community. Circular Head is then further exposed in that access to government services for help are at a greater distance. The ice addict's loss of moral control and mental health problems, and will do anything to access the drug and potentially snap violently and becomes uncontrollable. And this has become evidence in some of the communities. Circular Head, like many other communities, have individuals within using illicit and abusing legal drugs. There is a problem, but it is no greater than a lot of other communities, in my view, that I police. To support this, I'll refer to some real data that we use to measure community safety. We have a range of measurements such as Australian-wide independent community surveys in comparison of national standards of crime and reporting clearances. From the data per population, Tasmania has the lowest incident of crimes, and this is referred to as a victimisation rate. And we have also some of the best clearances. North West Coast, my district, leads the charge, having victimisation rates at levels in most categories, all categories in fact, well below the state average. Serious crime, for example, we run at 6 per 10,000 people as compared to the state average of 9. So I quite often take pride in the fact that in Tasmania we're the safest state, and in the North West District we're the safest area. This is supported by public document and is readily available on our website, and comparative data is there for you to look at. So before I attended this forum, I asked my crime analysis unit to compare Circular Head against some of the other municipalities in the North West Coast. Not surprisingly, Circular Head compares very favourably in relation to safety from crime in all categories. In total crime offences per 10,000 people, it is trending down over the past 5 years, and is currently at 22.8, a rate of half of Burnie and a third of Devonport. His comments to me was that after looking at the figures, he believes he'll pack up and move to Circular Head as the safest place in Tasmania. The argument might be that this relates to crime and not drug usage. I can indicate that when drug usage, especially ice, is at the extreme in the community, crime levels will peak. I have seen this firsthand in drug operations we've conducted across the state, where we are aware of an influx in ice. In certain communities we see crime peak, and we will remove the product or reduce the supply, the corresponding crime will decrease. This crime associated with ice usage is in the area of property crime, as the user tries to finance their habit, and in-person crime, as the user becomes violent and unpredictable, and the trafficker at times turns to violence to enforce their drug debts. Circular Head has not experienced anything like this to the degree I've seen in other communities. Obviously, a major one-off trauma incident impacts on the community, and we're all aware of some of the unfortunate things that happen in the community. So, I've now been a typical bureaucrat and given you data that has been collected over many years to support the assertion and reassure you that Circular Head is a very safe place to live. However, and there is always an however, I've made these assertions from a community and policing perspective. This does not come from the individual in the community that are battling with the problem of ice use. I watch friends, people who I know battle through the anguish and grief of the destructive behaviour of their loved ones. Those affected include the users, their parents, family and friends, the social workers, health providers, police and emergency support services, and the justice workers who try to tackle the individual problems on a day-to-day basis and balance this off against community demands. From a family, parent or friend perspective, the problem will be central to their whole world, as they see a loved one's behaviour and personality changing and doing things that they just cannot comprehend. For me to say to them it is not a problem is wrong, and it is these people we need to find solutions for. Not only for the user, but for the people, the parents, family that are affected by the user's behaviour. So how do we address the problem? I don't think the solution is with one department or a government throwing money continuously without structure or plans. It is not in the community going into panic and blaming everybody. Tasmania Police play only a part of the overall strategy. We target the supply chain of drugs. We do this by an intelligence-led system and a range of investigative activities that may be secretive or may be more open depending on the circumstances. We have had considerable success in this approach, which has been highlighted in the media over the last few years. Whilst we continue to have some success in this approach, I'm a realist and recognise that we'll never be able to wrest ourselves out of the problem. By this I mean we continue to wrest the supplier, but there seems to be always someone willing to step up and fill the gap. And there is a quick buck to be made at the expense of individuals in the communities, as the demand for drug has not been lessened. The approach of relying solely on prohibition, be it alcohol, cigarettes or other drugs, has always had limited success in most countries. If there is a demand, there will be a supplier, as Rob spoke about. If we decrease demand, there will not be the market out there, thus the supply will decrease. We need to recognise that this is a whole community problem, and as a community we find solutions. Tas Police are resourcing early intervention strategies, partnering with youth justice and caution and awareness programs. We could always do more, but we have to juggle the finite resources available and try to allocate to the area that need attention, whilst providing a core policing role within all the communities. No one government department, as I said, will have a solution. The solution will be in layers of strategies, from education, targeting the youth, awareness programs for parents as to how to identify signals, how to encourage good decision making, how to build resilience, how to avoid at-risk situations and behaviours and other factors that not only indicate the tendency that their child may be going down the wrong path, but develop a protective environment around them. Building in a safety net that if we can't prevent the use, then there are programs in place, counsellors and support to soften the fall for the users is also important. In amongst this is the policing, helping in education and awareness field, but still fulfilling their primary role out there targeting supply and working with the justice system to try to deter this activity. Eventually, if education and early intervention strategies have an impact, the demand hopefully dries up and the need for a reactive approach such as targeting suppliers and counselling affected users will lessen. It is a long-term solution. As a person in this community, don't think this won't happen to you. It may be your child, your grandchild and friend that goes down the wrong path. It is not restricted to any group of people in the community. Parents believe that their little Johnny never does anything wrong are some of the most problematic of all us service providers. Not only do they willfully turn a blind eye to their child's behaviour, they inadvertently reinforce this behaviour by defending and trying to protect them and make it difficult for service providers to get to the issue and help to find a proper solution. In conclusion, I believe that this forum should be the start of finding solutions, but I must reinforce the message. Circular Head as a community has no greater problem with drugs than any other area, and it still remains one of the nicest and safest places to live or visit. There is a problem nationally in this state and this community with pockets of abuse of the drug that effects are far more dramatic than have been previously experienced. The community should not panic, sensationalise the issue, turn on each other and try to apportion blame. We must work together and resist those who want to make the issue get something other than a problem that we can work with.
At the present time, if I take statistics, and there are lies, damn lies, and then there are statistics, right? I believe there's about 150 people here tonight. Would those 30 drug users who are taking ice please stand up? Now, to suggest that 10% of the people here are taking ice, I reject that. I have sat here in Smithton the last 20 years. I have seen the problems that this community faces. I'm aware of them. They are no different than any other community where I have sat, whether it be in Queenstown, whether it be in Burnie, Devonport, or I've sat in Launceston, or in Hobart. We all share the same problems. They're problems we need to tackle. So why am I here tonight? I've retired, but I still have a great concern for the young people of Tasmania. I have a great concern for the older generation, because don't believe for 1 second that those people who are taking drugs are all 19-year-olds, long-haired louts who don't work. Right? I have seen businessmen lose their business through taking drugs. I have seen a straight-A student going to a private school lose everything. I've seen him die through the use of drugs. I want to see that stopped. The problem with drugs, the problems in the community are not limited just to ice. It's much broader than that. And I think it was spoken about earlier. We have alcohol. We have all these other drugs that are coming along at the present time. I'd like to share with you at the moment my 20 years sitting on the bench. When I was appointed in 1994, I was appointed to Burnie. In the first 5 years, I noted the major problem was alcohol and cannabis. Now, the main issues coming before the court at that time. There were other issues from down this area, things like white paint and the like, I'll leave those aside. I won't go into those ones. But certainly, they were the two main drugs at that particular time. I've always believed, and I was very strong in my belief, that the use of cannabis did cause mental health issues. I spoke to a number of people about that, saying that something should be done to stop it. We shouldn't take a soft line with it, because it will develop. And I believe I've now been proven right, that mental health issues certainly increased dramatically throughout Tasmania and across Australia. After the first 5 years of seeing the cannabis start to develop, the next thing became quite apparent, and I'll speak for Burnie for the moment, and that was the use of prescription drugs. Oxycontin, morphine, these drugs are being supplied quite readily by people who had been to their doctor, got a prescription, and then sold a tablet for $50. Right? Now, if you got 30 tablets, I don't need to do the maths for you, it was quite profitable for them at that particular time. It was not uncommon to find people before the court driving with in their body morphine, and it was commonly detected. Not long after that, there was the development of MDMA, a company called Ecstasy. Sadly, it became a prevalent problem. It was easy to acquire. Even I knew about it quite easily. And that was, you went to certain places, hand over $50, they gave you a can of Coke, which you then lifted up very carefully, and under that was your ecstasy tablet. It was a drug which then extended beyond just those at parties at the hotel. It became a drug being used generally at parties throughout the state by adults, people who should have known better, people who thought it was fun to trip out on ecstasy. It was a significant problem as I saw it at that time. I raised the issue then. In more recent times, and certainly the last 8 years, when the police had stopped vehicles and were checking them for driving with alcohol in their body, it became quite apparent at that time that methamphetamine had hit the shores of Tasmania. It was clearly becoming a regular user by people that I had before me in the courts. It wasn't just limited to here, I'll be quite honest. It was across the board. It was in Hobart, it was in Launceston, and had developed from there. From that, of course, then comes the crystal methamphetamine, a highly toxic form of that particular drug. Now, I don't believe you can say that a person will never use drugs, or shall I rephrase it, never use ice. Because what I've found is this: you can go out if you have to be weak enough to take cannabis, and something's added to it. If methamphetamine, particularly ice, is added to cannabis, you'll have no choice. You've heard what Robert said about the fact that when you take methamphetamine, that very first time you take it, is an incredible high. You feel you can fly, you can do virtually anything at that particular time. That sticks with these people. That's why they find it hard to get off methamphetamine later on. Now that is the difficulty we have at the present time. People will always create a supply for the drugs if they want to do it. Only, I think it was yesterday or the day before at Launceston Airport, a 23-year-old Victorian girl was stopped at the airport carrying $500,000 worth of ice. $500,000. But that young girl didn't have $500,000 to go out and buy it. Somewhere behind her, there's probably a big businessman making a lot of money, with supplying the money and the drugs and using some foolish person for a quick buck to transport the ice for them. Right? They will always create a supply and a demand for them to make money. Drugs at the present time is a highly organised criminal activity. It makes big money. Recently, in Mexico, a drug dealer was in fact raided. They found $44 billion stashed in his house. $44 billion. It's all photographed, it's all available on the internet at the present time. That's incredible, isn't it? Now that man has weapons made of gold. He keeps a white tiger, one of the rarest tigers around, in his backyard. 6 lions, a panther, you name it, he's got it. Right? Now those are the people that will always try to create that demand for that drug. We as a community need to understand the risks that are being run by young people. Right? One thing I think we have to do with young people today in particular is don't put them down. Right? Talk to them. What does it cost you to walk along the street and say hi to a young person? Right? We can do that. They then feel they belong to that community rather than being ostracised. We spend too much time criticising the young people of today, and we shouldn't do that. Now in court I've sat and I've spoken to many, many young people and older people over 20 years. I've always spoken to them as a person, and they have responded to me. I can proudly say before you that I've never been abused in my court yet. Never will now, we're finished. But what it means is this: if you talk to somebody that appears to be kind of different to you, it doesn't cost you anything. Not a cracker. But it may mean a lot to that person. That person may think, hey, I'm recognised by another person. I'm not a scum on the side of the road. I'm not somebody to wipe your shoes on. I'm another person. Let's encourage that for these younger people. They'll then respond to us. I believe that's how we tackle this problem in particular. I'll get back to other main aim, while the minister's here. And that is this. What I have seen is I've done the court mandated drug program. I was very, very hard on who I put on that particular program. But I can tell tell you 4 very great successes of very heavy drug users. One has now become a counsellor. He's joined a church, not to get out of jail, I think it wasn't that. He's done everything right with his life. He's turned his entire life around. He's now 26, 27. And he ran up to me in the street the other day to thank me for what I've done for him. That young man has a new life, had a new purpose. Why? Because somebody listened to him. Somebody was prepared to listen to him and hear him and try to help him. Now we can all do that, right? It's easy to do. A young man in the street who looks like he's out of luck, just say, hi, how's it going? It costs you nothing. But you may save a life. I've seen too many young people have died through drug abuse and the like. Okay. So that's one thing I think we have to do. For those who are already on drugs, I think we do need a treatment place where they get proper residential help. Some of these people at the present time, I mean, you can say, let's ignore those ones who are on drugs now, they educate the new ones coming through. But they're going to see the drug users still now. We need to get them off the plate, stop them taking drugs, cure their habit, right? Then others can say, look, I've seen what they've gone through trying to get off that drug. I'm not going to start taking it. That's how we educate, I believe. That's the important factor. I've seen children dragged through child protection because mum and dad are on drugs. I've seen others, for example, who've been victims of violence purely and simply because of ice and other drugs. I've seen the situation where people in the family court have also had the same problem, where the marriage is broken down irretrievably through the abuse of drugs. These are issues that are there all the time, they're across the board. That's what we need to face. This is not a single problem, it's a community problem. We have to work together. But I stress also, we don't become vigilantes. That's the last thing you want to do. You don't want to start driving people out of town because they are involved in drugs. They're the ones who try to engender their support and say, look, okay, you're on drugs, why don't we try and get off it? Give them the time. Don't force them out of town or kick them out of town. That's really just moving the problem elsewhere. That's pointless. That's all I can say at the present time. I think I've covered most points. But I honestly believe that if you spend time talking to young people, they will listen. I've not found one yet that doesn't. As an example, in finishing up, today when I got down here I thought, well, let's find out what's really happening. So I walked into a hotel, I walked up to 4 young blokes drinking, and I want to ask you about ice and drugs. I said, why? So I'm going to the forum tonight, I'd like to know what your views are. If you asked us that before, what do you tell me? I want to know. What do you think about the problem? Why are you using ice? Do you have friends who are? So I went through things with them. They were quite frank. They just sat there with me and chatted. Now if I can do that, you can do it. Right? It's only if we do that, and remember we are a community, let's bring community back into it. Let's form a real community where we actually help each other, support each other, rather than in fact pointing the finger and condemning others. It's not the same. So I'll leave those thoughts with you.
Well, I'm going to actually keep my comments fairly short because time is running on, and I think we're really keen to make sure that you are able to ask questions and comment on the issues from your perspective. It is really impressive to see this turnout here tonight. I don't think I've ever witnessed a turnout like this in my whole career around a single drug problem or drug problems in the large even. As the Minister said, he asked me the day after he met with Robert Waterman, and by the way, Robert and I have had many discussions over the recent weeks, haven't we, Robert, about a whole range of issues. I think we've tried to solve the world's problems at times, but certainly the Minister was very keen to be quick out of the blocks and try and understand what is happening in this local community. But as we've heard also, he was concerned, as I was, to be ensuring that we're looking at Tasmania as a whole, that there were not actually missing something and either under or overestimating the problem and what therefore we might seek to do in response. So I started talking to a wide range of health professionals in the northwest and other human service workers to try and get some sort of idea of what was going on, because clearly when we looked at the data, as I think you've heard already, and in the handout that is available to you, it doesn't yet demonstrate that we have a significant problem. We have an increased problem, no question. There is an increased availability of amphetamine type stimulants in Tasmania. And Robert presented some of that data too, around even at a national level at the borders, an increase of interdiction. So police have had more seizures, but of course that's a biased statistic. That can depend on what police decide to target and how they go about their business. But just the same, a range of data suggesting that there is an increased availability. Another source of data is what we call the illicit drug reporting system, and there's an ecstasy-related drugs reporting system that we looked at as well. That data doesn't yet show a significant increase, but that data doesn't look at the northwest of the state. So there's a problem, there's a gap in our data. So once amphetamine type stimulants become more prevalent in the community, because of the nature of the drug, as you've heard, at some point people start coming out of the woods, not because they want to seek treatment, but because they get into strife. So they might either develop a physical health problem that can be quite dramatic and serious, or a mental health problem. So I went to, of course, the directors of the emergency department, Dr. Mario Rizrock, and I spoke to the directors of the other EDs in the state, and then I spoke to people in our mental health services, where we might expect to see the problems emerging. And they all had the same thing to say, as you've heard already, ladies and gentlemen, and that alcohol is by far and away the first drug of concern in this state, in terms of medical problems, acute and chronic, and in terms of mental health issues. Followed by, as the Minister's mentioned, the other drugs. Cannabis is the second drug in terms of treatment for drug problems in this state after alcohol. Then it's amphetamines, the whole lot, not just crystal methamphetamine, and then prescription drugs. By the way, though, those data do not include opioid dependence. So they do not include the number of people being treated each day with methadone or buprenorphine for their opioid dependence, whether it's heroin on the mainland. Thankfully, in one sense, we don't have that much of it in Tasmania, but we have, as Don Jones has mentioned, we have Oxycontin and morphine as drugs that are being unfortunately diverted and misused. And of course, in my space, I'm seeing that every day, clinically. So the other thing to say is people who do use drugs report that it is easy to obtain amphetamine type stimulants, or including ice, to use a colloquial term, and cannabis. So we've been looking at this at a state level, gathering our data, and we will furnish a final report. In fact, I've got some new stats today that added to the picture, and we'll build in a more confident picture over the next week or two or three, and furnish the Minister with our best shot at estimating the size. But one of the reasons we had the forum in Burnie last week, and why I think you're all here tonight, is we want to hear from you. The anecdotes can be powerful and important as well. The information that you have will add to the picture and make our estimate of the problem, and therefore what we should do, more reliable. By the way, I've mentioned alcohol. I'll just say here that I attended the AMA National Alcohol Summit in Canberra for 2 days earlier in the week, and you're going to be hearing a lot more about alcohol in that space, because the doctors of Australia are now becoming more concerned, and I think you're going to hear them articulate more clearly what we are seeing every day in our clinical practice across the country. And we actually have a whole range of evidence-based pathways forward to address this problem. And I would like to say to you, we've talked about resilience and vulnerability. I liked the theme of Robert's presentation about where we should be going in terms of prevention, and he was really talking about the developmental health agenda. That was discussed in some detail in Canberra, ladies and gentlemen. And the fact is, the first 1,000 days of life can be critical to who we become as human beings, and whether we're adaptive and pro-social and have good both cognitive and emotional intelligence, whether we deal with life problems adaptively and safely or otherwise. And some of that plays into the space of alcohol and other drug use and the problems that emerge. We have evidence. The challenge is translating that evidence into public policy reform and interventions and programs. And that's a challenge not just in drug and alcohol, I might hasten to add. So that's on our national agenda. We're talking about that. The researchers across the country and the doctors and other health professionals and human service workers are very aware of this body of evidence. But translational science or integration and implementation sciences are new bodies of science that help us understand what the challenges are to translate what we know into what we do as a society. Once we decide who it is we want to be, what do we aspire for our communities? What don't we want in our communities? And that can help shape who we become into the future. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very impressed that you're all here today, because that says to me, as a local community, you care about each other. And that's fundamentally important for where we need to head. And as Robert has alluded, the prevention agenda. Without that, we're not going to go too far. There's a range of things we're thinking about in terms of solutions. Some of them are mentioned in the handout. I don't want to preempt where we might end up, and certainly, finally, it's a political decision. We as the doctors and researchers of Australia can present the evidence and our best pass on what we think we could and should do. But there are many wants, many needs in the community, competing needs, and there's not enough money to go around. And so finally, it is our parliaments that decide who we are and where we head as a state and as a nation. And so I'll play my best, do the best I can in that space. But we need you to also be voices within the community and build that sense of solidarity and support with advice. But seek advice, seek evidence. Don't just make it up. That's critically important if we're going to become a more enlightened society, a healthier and safer society where we all can flourish to the best of our abilities. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.